Well, hello there everyone, Mystery here, and today with a bit of an unexpected video, for myself at least, because, as you could see by the thumbnail, I have a bit of a hot take for you today, but this didn't come about as a result of thinking about those characters, it came about as a result of me attempting to put together a video on a rework, or a potential rework, for the Zealot, in order to make the Zealot more interesting and engaging, and generally broaden his skill set. But I was thinking about his power level and realizing that he isn't underpowered. He is quite a strong character, but at the same time, I think he's a very well-balanced character, and in fact, another hot take for you, I think the Zealot is the most balanced character this game has to offer. Now, why does he feel weak in comparison to the rest of the cast if he is so well balanced? Well, that's simply because the Zealot is a rule follower, and these other classes, especially the ones that supersede him, especially Veteran and Psyker, as you saw by the thumbnail, they are rule breakers. So that is what the video is about today, is we are going to explain the rules, the core tenets that class design and general game design in Darktide, or really in many Horde shooters, should follow in order to keep the game fair and engaging. Now, if you like analytical content like this, or you've been enjoying my Darktide content over this past year, or maybe you just found it just now, hey, welcome in. Make certain you're subscribed. I bet I have this feeling, and I said this gut feeling, that next year, 2026, is going to be a massive year for Darktide, and of course, I'll be here all along the way to guide you through it. So I really appreciate you guys joining me this year. It's been great to receive so much support. Let's go ahead and start in here, and because we are going to ultimately end up with our thesis statement all put out there, talking about the Veteran and the Psyker, and why these guys are fundamentally just cheating at the game, why they are breaking the game in their current forms. Well, we have to understand what there is to cheat. You need to know the rules in order to know how to cheat, right? And that all comes down to, back to that Zealot point. The Zealot is the rule follower. He is the paragon by which we are going to set the rules here, and I'll go back to him a couple of times here to show examples of how he is such a good rule setter for this game, and how if we just constructed our classes with these simple rule sets in mind, with these limitations on design, we would have a much better, more balanced space. And it's only when we go outside of this that we start to run into problems where things get a little bit carried away. And I'll also address the potential critical pushback, which would say, hey, it's okay if things are OP, it's a PvE game. I'll hit that at the end too, so if that's you probably want to stick around to hear me debunk your point with facts and logic. So let's start here with the rules. These are the rules of, I don't know, what do I call them? Rules of class design, rules of Darktide, and these all are, well, there's 4 rules. There's 3, and then there's one that is a superseding rule, a meta rule that just takes precedent over all the rest of them. So the 3 rules are as such. Rule 1, the cleave rule. The cleave rule simply states, if you are dealing damage to multiple enemies, the damage you deal to each individual enemy should be less than the damage you would deal to one enemy individually. So when you're fighting an enemy one-on-one, you can hit them in the head every single time, you can attack them and only them with your strongest attacks, and therefore, when you're fighting 5 of that same enemy, it really shouldn't be feasible that you hit all those enemies for the same amount of damage that you would have hit that first enemy for, right? There will be diminishing returns. And things like this are already baked into the game in the form of cleave, where when you cleave through one enemy, the next enemy receives less damage as a percentage of the first attack that you did, and then the next enemy after that, if you cleave through that, does even less, and so on and so forth. So this is a pretty integral way to balance characters' damage, so they just can't literally melee infinite enemies at the same time. The rule of engagement. The rule of engagement simply states the vast majority of enemies should engage you in combat before they are removed from the field. That simply means they need to interact with you in some way before they are removed from the game. And what is an interaction? What defines engaging with you? Well, anything that forces a reaction out of you at all. So if you have an enemy shooting at you and you dodge them, or if you get hit by them, or if you have to use some ammo or attack them to block them or whatever it is. If you make some sort of input as a counter to what that enemy does, you are reacting to them. You are now engaged with that enemy. This could even be as simple as an enemy threatening you by positioning near you, right? If a crusher starts to move towards you, you innately start to back up, and even if the crusher never swings a single attack, he has effectively engaged you then, because his role as a line breaker, as a disruptor, has been accomplished. So that is what engagement means, and there are exceptions to this. As I said, most enemies, the vast majority, should engage you, but you'll have the odd enemies where you'll kill them on the opening salvo of a fight, right? You'll pick off 1 or 2 enemies before anybody reacts. Those enemies didn't even get a chance to play the game. They had no bearing on the outcome of the game at all. They simply died instantaneously, and that can happen. There's a lot of different skills in the game, such as stealth, that allow you to pick off a couple of enemies at a time like this, and that's okay as an exception to the rule. But most enemies need to be able to engage with you, because if they didn't, they would all just be test dummies sitting around for you to destroy. The third rule is the rule of proportional costs. Any change to the game state should incur a proportional cost. What does the game state mean? What does a change to the game state? The changing game state, or the game state in general, is literally anything happening in the game. So if you do something in furtherance of the goal of completing the mission or winning the game, you are changing the game state, and you must incur a cost to that. So if you wanted to do something really large to change the game state, such as healing all of your allies back to full, well, you have to expend charges on the Medicae station. That is a cost. If you wanted to refill all of your allies' ammo to full, you'll have to drop an ammo crate. That is a cost. If you wanted to deal a large chunk or dispatch a boss, you could either have a cost in the form of maybe some of your blitz charges, or just your time. If you wanted to just focus all your damage on this boss, it will take time in order to do that, and time is also a cost that we need to incur here. So whatever it is, the larger the effect, the larger the cost that should be incurred on the person who's causing the effect, right? You shouldn't get a really, really big effect that changes the game, that gives you a huge, huge boost for a very, very cheap price, is the easy way of saying this. And then finally, the superseding rule, the meta rule, as I'll call it from here on out. The meta rule is really simple. You can ignore any of these other rules for an appropriate cost. If you expend some sort of resource, whatever it is, then you can ignore any one of the other rules and make your build work around that. And this is a very defining characteristic in Darktide for a lot of classes. It sounds kind of broken, but let me go back here and explain it. We'll go one by one through the first 3 rules here, and we'll show how the meta rule trumps these, how it supersedes it, and how it fundamentally makes classes work. So with the first rule here, the cleave rule. The cleave rule basically meaning, you can't hit multiple enemies all at the same time for the same amount of damage. Well, if you're the zealot and you come upon 30 enemies, you could certainly take your sweet time and get around meleeing all of them, and, probably take about 15, 20, probably even 30 seconds to fight back all those enemies. You might even take a couple hits along the way. Or you could break the first rule. You could break the cleave rule by using the meta rule, by expending a resource to break that rule. You could pull out your flamer, or you could use an immolation grenade, and you could immediately just skip this entire fight. You could cleave all those enemies down using one of your 2 resources, or, there's more resources that he has, but using a resource in order to just ignore that rule for the time being. But obviously you can't do that forever, because both of those are expendable resources. They do not come back without you having to pick up more ammo. So a great way that the zealot is still following the rule, he's just following the meta rule. The second rule here was that rule of engagement, right? So let's take a Psyker, for example, here. A Psyker follows the rules of engagement sometimes, but let's take the example here of Brain Burst. What about a Psyker who goes through the entire level and brain bursts every single enemy from the farthest distance possible, right? He literally just peeks around the corner and he sees the enemies that are 200 meters away. Literally, they cannot even shoot at you from that range, and he brain bursts them one at a time all the way through the map. And that, you know, eventually you'll summon hordes and stuff like that, but you'll eliminate a ton of enemies by doing this, and you wouldn't even have them engage with you. So it seems like the Psyker is breaking the second rule, the rule of engagement here, because he is not letting these enemies interact with him at all. He's basically cheesing the game. And so that's really poor design, right? Clearly, Brain Burst is overpowered. I hear you. You're like, oh, yes, I understand. This is why Mr. E thinks the Psyker is overpowered. He's got shit like this. Well, hold on there, Timmy. I admire your enthusiasm, but he is actually still following the rules because he is using the meta rule here. He is expending a resource to snipe these enemies, to remove these enemies from the game before they can interact with you. And it's not peril, right? Because peril isn't basically a resource at all. It is in fact time. It takes like 3+ seconds to do a single brain burst. Imagine brain bursting. How long would it take you to brain burst your way through an entire map doing this? Like an hour or more? It would literally take you so long, it would be faster just to pull out a gun and shoot them and get the ammo back. So you can do that. You can start every engagement by brain bursting, you know, 3 to 5 enemies, and it'll make the engagement easier, but think about the time that it takes to do that and what you could be doing with that time instead. So there is still a resource cost here. There is still a cost being exchanged with the meta rule. The Psyker is still following that rule, and Brain Burst is not OP because it takes so much time. Now, on the other end of the argument, if you took Brain Burst and you removed the cast time, and you literally made it, and you made it hit 5 enemies at the same time, and you could instantly click and burst enemies as you looked at them, then it would be OP, because it would be ignoring the resource cost, and it would be able to kill enemies before engaging with it, and that would break all the rules and all the tenets. But as far as Brain Burst is concerned, as far as that sort of behavior, it is still balanced. It's just balanced based on the amount of time it consumes to cast that and get any effect out of it. Okay, and now finally, let's talk about that rule of what did I call it? Proportional costs. The rule of proportional costs basically meaning if you want to change the game state in a big way, you gotta make a big expenditure. And that is, well, I mean, if you're surrounded by a million billion enemies and you got to fight them all back, say you're playing Ogren, right? You've got one ally down, you've got your allies who are pinned in a corner, there's flamers, you're starting to take damage, right? You could fight this back. You could manually fight through all this and just beat every enemy down. What would that potentially cost you? You'd have to expend a proportional cost to fight a losing fight. You'd probably have to lose a bunch of health. You might lose some ammo. You might even lose the life of the ally who's on the ground. There would be costs associated with fighting this fight out the normal way, or you could meta rule it and you could expend a valuable resource and just trump that whole fight, just skip the whole thing. And that would be something like dropping a frag bomb, right? Just to screen clear and wipe everything. So there is still a cost, there's still a price being paid here to just say, okay, yeah, I can't be fucking arsed to deal with this entire fight. I'm going to drop my frag bomb and I'm going to nuke everything. GG, it's over. And then you get the reset from there. And then if you wanted to further recoup, if you wanted to say reset the health states of all your allies who got downed, you're going to need to find a meta station, or you're going to need to have a med kit. So it'll take more and more cost depending on how much of that game state you want to reset to where you started. So as you can see, pretty much every behavior that is non-toxic or non-cheating in this game follows these rules. This is how the game should operate. And here is where we get into trouble, because this is where I make the turn and point the finger at Psyker and Veteran. These two classes here, these guys are repeat offenders. They are quite frequently and flagrantly violating these rules every single day, every single game, many multiples of times, and the way that they violate them is just excessive. And so we're going to go through here and go through each of the rules, and we're going to show how the Psyker and the Veteran both step all over these rules, and by doing so, they make other classes feel obsolete. It makes other classes feel like they're shitty in comparison, when really the other classes are just trying to stay balanced, and these guys are out here effectively just ignoring the rules and cheating. So this is the point of the video where I make people mad, because they're going to be like, what the hell do you mean, like, Veteran and Psyker are cheating? They're like, it's a class. You can pick the class and play it if you want. It doesn't mean you're like less skilled if you play the class, yada yada. What I'm saying really is that these two classes, more than most, although all classes to some extent or another, tend to violate one of these rules occasionally, but these two classes really flaunt the rules, especially Psyker. Psyker is the greatest transgressor on this calculation. The Psyker is basically playing by his own rule set 95% of the time, and we'll get into exactly how both these classes break the rules, but I just wanted to go ahead and get up ahead of that and say, listen, I'm not saying that, if you play these classes, you're less than skilled or whatever. What I'm saying is that these two classes are interfacing with the game in a way that the game can't really react to. And we'll show that right now, I suppose. Let's go ahead and go through the rules and show how each of these classes is really just completely disregarding that this is a fundamental limitation that any balanced class would normally have. So our first rule, the rule of cleave, which is basically saying that, hey, you shouldn't be able to do as much damage to 50 targets as you do when you're doing single target DPS. And I think if we look at the Psyker here, it's pretty clear what I'm going to bring up immediately here. That's the Flame Staff. The Flame Staff kills one enemy as fast as it kills 10,000 enemies. And you can spray this thing with absolute wanton disregard over every enemy around you. You can cast it all game long. It has no resource cost whatsoever. It is an infinite ammo flamethrower. You know, the one that I cited the Zealot as having a reasonable amount of balance for because he can use a resource to cleave. Well, the Psyker can just do that full-time as a full-time job, and that breaks the game because those hordes, all that stuff that was supposed to get into melee with you and interface with you, well, it just doesn't now. So the game ends up having to send bigger and bigger hordes to compensate for, well, what if they have a Flamestaff Psyker on the team and he erases 90% of stuff, which we'll get to when we get to point 2. But that's a really big issue for the Psyker, or rather for the game when reacting to what the Psyker can bring. But there is other weapons that he can really abuse this cleave rule with. The Void Blast Staff is not insignificant in the fact that it's basically like a miniature grenade with as much stagger as a regular grenade that goes off every second or so, and it's literally free. You can just do the whole game long. And we also have an offender on the melee side of things for this cleave rule, and that's the Force Greatsword. Now, listen, I don't want the Force Greatsword to be nerfed. I love the damn weapon. It is so cool. However, I think it might be a little bit excessive that this weapon can just go around light attack spamming and cleave through everything that's an elite gunner or less in terms of health with a single light attack headshot. And it literally loses almost no efficacy against hordes. And then, of course, you just get this free Wind Slash ultimate that throws out a magic glaive forward and it annihilates everything in a particular direction, which is crazy. Like, we have a weapon that is already as good as this weapon is on a baseline. Think about how powerful if you're familiar with the Force Greatsword, this weapon is so much more powerful than its rough equivalent on the Zealot, the Relic Blade. It does way more DPS just unempowered without even using the weapon special. And then, as opposed to the weapon special on the Relic Blade, which just kind of turns the blade on and makes it deal a little bit more damage and make it rend through armor a little better, this thing will just annihilate everything in a given direction, which is all cool when you're playing it, but then you're playing like, for instance, you're playing melee Hive Scum, and you've got a melee Psyker on your team, and if the Psyker's doing their job, well, you look in a direction and the Psyker just goes whoosh and just slashes everything. Like, it does thousands of damage in a huge arcing slash. It goes through walls, by the way. You can literally just do it through walls to where enemies are behind the wall. Like, this weapon literally definitionally breaks the cleave rule many times over. So the Psyker is super problematic when it comes to this because he can not only achieve some of the best single target damage in the game, with the Force Greatsword especially, but he can also just annihilate hordes at an incredible clip as well. We also have the Veteran to talk about here. The Veteran is much less of an offender at this rule, though, than the Psyker is. The Veteran, of course, has the Plasma Gun, which can just penetrate everything in a big-ass long line. It does 100 piercing, basically, 100... what do they call it? Whatever. It goes through armor. It goes through walls. It goes through barriers. It goes through bulwark shields. Right. This weapon is not obstructed by anything, and that means it has ostensibly cleave. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. The word I was looking for. It ostensibly has infinite cleave, And that is a little bit excessive, although it's not nearly as bad as the flame staff is on this front. And then we have to consider that he has grenades that you're getting to use 50 plus of them per game, and those also can just splash around and kill a bunch of stuff. It's basically like having extra ammo that explodes all the time. Although, as I said, he is not nearly as much of an offender on this first rule, but the veteran is a really big offender on rule number 2 here, when we talk about the rule of engagement, which is basically, as you remember, saying that most enemies should be given a chance to engage with you, should be given a chance to actually launch an attack or force a reaction out of you. The veteran is so excessively powerful at range and so good at sustaining his ammo capacity that without really any resource cost, he can just range down 90% of the map. He can, my interactions with melee enemies on veteran are so scarce when I'm playing this class, because I can just run ahead of the group, start shooting stuff with my recon las gun. All those enemies die, they start to walk towards me, and I continue to shoot them with the recon las gun until they're dead, and then 1 or 2 enemies might make it to me. But the grand majority of enemies are going to be erased by your ranged preferences, by just your obscene ranged damage, as well as just your ranged ammo sustain. And even on other weapons, such as the plasma gun, ammo is still not really a consideration, especially when playing non-havoc game modes where there's just ammo aplenty. So this class can just infinitely destroy enemies from extremely long distances, which means most of the enemies that are passively patrolling the map, or that might come in through hordes, etc., are not going to get to do the thing they need to do in order to be effectively threatening enemies. And the same thing perhaps even goes double for a specialist. A veteran, especially a skilled veteran, we have to assume a certain level of skill when we're talking about these sort of conversations. If a veteran that knows what they're doing will eliminate 75-80% of specialists before they get to do anything, because they'll just shoot them. They'll just shoot them a couple of times and they'll die. And the veteran is not only doing that for effectively free resource cost wise, but they're also generating cooldown by doing that thanks to tactical awareness. So the veteran can pick all these specialists before they can actually get to the team and threaten the team. And this means you've effectively made the game have to spawn 20 specialists in order for 2 of them to actually get in there and do something they need to do. And that'll be a big point that'll come back to the end when we discuss how this works, or how this detrimentally affects the whole team. The other really big thing here is that the veteran is so safe at range that this can even apply to bosses. When I play against bosses on like recon lasgun, focus target veteran with some grenades or something, the boss spawns in, I immediately tag the boss up and start shooting with the recon lasgun. By the time that they have closed any amount of distance to me, the guy's already missing 1/3 of his HP. Then he gets a little bit closer, I throw a crack grenade on his head, it explodes and does another 1/4 of his HP, he gets knocked back and dazed. By the way, he's still not even remotely close enough to melee me. Then he finally gets to the range where he might be able to melee me. I go ahead and shout. Now he's knocked back again, and the whole team finishes him off. So the level of interaction that you have with bosses when you have a single class that can chuck 2 crack grenades and shout, all of which will stagger a boss, it just completely makes bosses look like jokes. And those are all very easily replenishable resources. It's not like some other classes where your grenades are precious and you need to hold them, like the rocket launcher is. No, you print 1 grenade at least, at minimum, every minute on this class. So it's like a cooldown instead. And so yeah, the veteran has a very, very low cost for just effectively killing most things before they can engage with you at all. The Psyker also has a really big problem on rule number 2 here. As far as eliminating enemies before they can get to you, this really mainly refers to hordes and just massive groups of enemies. The fact that the Flame Staff can just get rid of so many lightly armored and light health enemies just means that hordes effectively don't really exist. So the game has to send larger and larger numbers of hordes, or on higher difficulties, it favors sending more elite enemies instead. However, if the game decides to spawn gunners, for whatever reason, our lovely Flame Staff in the Psyker suppresses gunners. So you have a situation where these enemies that would normally be shooting at you and you'd have to be dodging them are now suppressed, and so literally you don't interact with them at all. You just fire some flame staff over them and they just cower there. And I think this is probably one of the most egregious things about the flame staff, in my personal opinion, is that the flame staff just suppresses all ranged enemies, and so they just become ineffectual. It's like the enemies don't even exist for purposes of increasing the challenge and engagement of the game. So there's other issues at hand here with the Psyker, but I think really the Flame Staff is the major one that I want to address. Of course, you have things like Smite or like Infinite Smite, or I guess now it's Pseudo-Infinite Smite, but just genuinely like the amount of stuff you can do to kill enemies without ever having to go within 20 feet of them, and you can do this all game long with no resource cost to yourself or danger to yourself. It is truly excessive. If any other class wanted to do that, they would have to expend thousands and thousands of ammo worth of resources, or I mean, literally no other class can do this sort of stuff. Then we have the third rule, and this is the rule that both of them are really, really, really big transgressors of, which is the rule of proportional costs. Basically saying that if you're going to do something that has a really big impact on the game state or does something very, very effective or powerful, you need to expend a big cost for it. A great example of this, as I mentioned before, we had Chorus Zealot, who back in the day was breaking this rule really bigly because he could cast Chorus, an incredibly impactful ability, every 20 seconds. Not okay. But we now have a couple of classes here who have insanely powerful ultimates and insanely powerful tools in their kits that they can do without any regard for what the cooldown is. Let's go ahead and start with Psyker here, because Psyker is a massive offender to this. First of all, Psyker has Scryer's Gaze. Scryer's Gaze over the past couple of years has just crept up and up and up in terms of power, and now we have an ability that is the single strongest DPS increase ability in the game. It makes you faster, it makes you regen toughness, it makes you tougher, it makes you deal more damage on criticals and regular attacks. It lasts for infinity duration, and then it can linger after the infinity duration is over. It can allow you to free cast for that entire duration, plus the time over, which has obvious implications to how stabs are already broken. It breaks them even further. And then, of course, the cooldown is next to nothing. The cooldown is one of the shortest cooldowns in the entire game, and thanks to Psyker's passive cooldown regeneration, you can have this ability up before the actual duration of the ability is up, which means you just have an infinite, massive damage steroid to your class, which is not okay. No other class would have this. In fact, if we look at the Hive Scum has literally the inverse of this. The Hive Scum has a DPS boosting ability that wants so desperately to be Scryer's Gaze, but instead of having infinite uptime, it literally has a forced downtime, where you come crashing down off your sugar high and can take a bunch of damage and suffer the results. The Scryer's Gaze Psyker has literally no downtime on its ability that's twice as powerful as Rampage is proportionally. We also have Bubbles and Venting Shriek, both of which have just silly short cooldowns. We not only have Psykinetics Aura on this class, but we also have the Warp Siphon talent tree, which can lower cooldowns by up to like 40% or so. These stack together and make it so that these abilities, which are supposed to be pretty impactful, right? The ability to summon a dome that protects you from bullets. The weakness of the dome is that if the enemies can shatter the dome, you don't have it for a certain amount of time. But with the speed at which cooldowns can come up on this class now, you can have multiples of these domes on the field at once. And so if they shatter one, you're probably just a second or two away from having another, and it boosts the whole team's efficacy. And then of course Venting Shriek, which just not only just guaranteed kills everything in a given direction, like venting that shriek onto a horde on Auric Damnation or below is going to just instantly kill all trash enemies. That ability is on like a 10-second cooldown, and it staggers all enemies, including Crushers, who are in the middle of overheads as well. So yeah, this is 3 abilities on this class that are just bonkers broken, not to mention the myriad of other ways that this class can just cheese out a game states. Like, I don't know at what point we decided that the Psyker also needed to be able to just resurrect people for free, because you can use the thing that transfers your block into peril and just get people up, no problem. Yeah, so the Psyker is a big offender here, but so is the Veteran. Because the Veteran, we're supposed to have powerful ultimates be tied to long cooldowns, and the Veteran happens to still have the most powerful ultimate in the game, I would say, with Voice of Command. Voice of Command somehow is, even after like a mild nerf, is still sitting at a 30-second cooldown. And that 30-second cooldown is for an ability that effectively is the hardest of hard resets short of chorus that you can pull for your team. It literally takes your team's losing position and converts it into a winning position by not only returning your health to full and overcapping your toughness, it can also boost all of your team's toughness by 50 and overcap their toughness to gold toughness, which gives you immunity to damage. It also knocks back every enemy within the radius, including bosses, which can just stagger them out of any animation that they're doing. And all of this on a 30-second cooldown, which, thanks to cooldown reduction curios and your talents in your tree, can be as low as like 13 or 12 seconds. So this ability would be the best ability in the game, even if it had a 1-minute cooldown, and yet it is on a less than 30-second cooldown with a lot of regularity. And this single ability can just completely insulate you. It just completely acts as a cushion where if things are getting a little bit spicy, just go ahead and shout. It'll be back up in 15 seconds, no problem, and it knocks back all the enemies. So it's just this all-round jack of all trades, and this is a really, really difficult position for other support classes to be in, because you have to compete when you're making a decision. Do I want to play the Veteran as a support or something else? How am I going to provide the defensive utility and the offensive utility that the Shout can with anything else? And the answer is you really can't, because this ability is so good and on such a short cooldown. And that violates Rule 3 in a very flagrant way. This has an absolutely immense game effect. It's a literal take your losing position, turn it into a winning one, a table turner, a tide turner, if you will, and it is one of the shortest cooldown abilities in the game yet again. So here we are, all three of the major rules violated by these classes time and time again, and yeah, why is this a problem? Well, this is the last part of the video here, is why is this a problem? Why do I want to make an issue about this? And why do I think it's unhealthy for the game to have classes that exist at that level of power in the paradigm, or who are flaunting the rules? Well, it's because of the implications it has on everybody else. If you are not playing these characters, if you are not playing these OP characters, I tend to shy away from using the phrase OP because people have a reaction to it, but if you are not using one of these characters, well, you are playing a game that is designed around accommodating for said characters. So if you've ever played a game of Damnation or Auric or above, you have most certainly encountered the shotgunner closet, where there's 25 plus shotgunners that just come out of fucking nowhere, or the infinite chain of specials, where it just seemingly will not stop throwing 4 specials at a time at you for 2 or 3 minutes. Why do these things happen? These are like, especially the special chain is like insanely deadly for an Ogryn, because it'll spawn a burster and then like 3 trappers and just send them at you, and good luck fucking dodging all that on the Ogryn, right? Why is it doing this? Why is the game so fucking intent on murdering us? Well, it's because in order to compensate for the fact that we have these rule breakers, these ne'er-do-wells on the team who can just eliminate 90% of these threats without batting an eye, you have to spawn this amount of shit. So if we could reduce these characters, if we could take them and make them so that they don't make the other classes completely obsolete by having just better abilities, better cooldowns, better weapons, then we could scale back the game as well so that it's not so bonkers, ball-breakingly insane for anyone who's not playing with one of these meta builds. Because if you've ever pushed into Upper Havoc, you know the difference when you're running a team that has Shout Veteran and or a Flame Staff Psyker versus one that doesn't. When you don't have these tools, you are working for it. You are absolutely having to conserve your HP, you're having to watch your cooldowns because your supportive cooldowns like Chorus are on long timers, and then you also have to work your ass off in order to clear hordes, because clearing hordes takes resources for anybody else, or you have to engage in melee in order to clear them, which is dangerous. If you have got the Flamestaff Psyker out there, no problem. Let me just throw a bubble up for you every 10 seconds, and I'll deal with all of the hordes easy peasy. Oh, you've got bosses coming in? Don't worry, I'm the veteran. I'll just shout and stagger them permanently, plus grenades to wipe out any packs of armor that we have to even consider. You know, the crack grenades, especially here, are just like, they just completely neutralize the armor threat. And the difference in attempting a corrupted armor run with the no veteran versus with veteran with crack grenades is like night and day, right? So what I would really like is to see some of these incredible outliers disincentivized, bring them down. Because if you bring them down, you can bring the game down from being so freaking insane that it is just ridiculous. Because we're getting to that point where with power creep on these classes, that there really will be no solution to it. The Flame Staff, in essence, is so strong because it can do so much effective damage to so many targets at once that the game might as well just spawn infinite hordes, right? And what would that do to every other class or every team composition that doesn't have the Flame Staff? It would absolutely terrorize them. But if you do have the Flame Staff, it would be like a, just another day on the job. So that's what I really, really want to see here. That's why I'm making the video, is because having these classes that do not play by the rules means in order to corral them, in order to have them be challenged and have a interactive gameplay experience, you need to create challenge that breaks the rules of the game as well. So we break the rules, the characters break the rules, and then Darktide breaks the rules back by spawning an obscene amount of shit or just spawning cruel and unusual things that otherwise cannot be handled. Anyway, there you go, guys. Hopefully that explains my position there and, counters the never nerfers. Let me know what you think down in the comments, if you agree or disagree or whatever it is, and I'll see you real soon for the prospective Zealot rework video. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.